at 8:59 a.m. Let us stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God. Okay. I'll begin now with the minutes of July 29th.
Chairman,
Sure.
if I may, on the second page of the minutes, near the bottom, in the lengthy paragraph where it says Mr. Hughes requested that the Audit Committee review the contract. I would like that's basically correct, but what I also said was that I would like to amend that to provide that Mr. Hughes requested the Audit Committee have the opportunity to review the contract with Malden and Jenkins prior to approval by the Town Council. So we have a chance to look at its terms.
I think we'll bring that up as we go forward in our discussion here today. Just get the minutes taken care of, okay?
Well, that is an amendment to the minutes, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm moving to amend the minutes with that provision.
Mr. Chairman,
Any discussion on that?
You don't.
we're going to vote separately on every change?
You don't have to.
No.
I have another change, Mr. Chairman. Up in the motion, under Roman 5, Mr. Lombard moved. And next to the last line, and it says, rank and recommendation be forthwith. It should be sent forthwith. The word sent added between be and forthwith. Roman 5,
I'm
under the motion, the second, I guess it's the last line in the motion.
Yeah, the word sent is left out.
Motion passed on the other side.
The last line of the motion reads,
Right,
rank
so it
and
says-
recommendation be forthwith. The word sent between be and forthwith.
I got it. And you want to change that to? Amended to what?
Between the words be and forthwith, insert the word sent, S-E-N-T.
Okay, sent. Right? And Dan wants to amend your part there.
Is John Goggin on the line?
No, he's not.
I would have one other thing. Going back to Roman numeral 4 on page 1, the first line, and Chair stated 10 months to complete the audit, and they inappropriately contacted him. Is that the right word?
That's correct.
They inappropriately contacted him?
Yes, more than once.
I didn't remember the word. Why was it inappropriate, Jim?
Yeah.
I'm a volunteer, like we all are. We are not, I can't go down there and say how you're going to do an audit, how things are going to have to be done. He is. Okay? And they didn't want to call him, they were calling me. Because, as I told you, when we did the election of the Jenkins, the problems we were having then. All that, right, Ed? You were here. No, it was not nice, and I don't think that was proper for me to do.
I don't know if I would call it inappropriate.
So I returned that information over to Robert Lang to handle, but not me.
And that's good. I mean, I'm sure that's where it should have been sent to, but on the other hand, why would it be inappropriate for an auditor to contact the chairman of the audit committee who selected them? I mean, I don't quite
Well,
get that, but
there was a number of times that they did that. I don't think that was correct.
But with my change and Ed's change, I move adoption of the minutes of July 29.
second,
Okay.
A question. I wasn't here, but I think I need to vote on the approval of the minutes.
Yes, you can. You can. That's
Okay.
That's permitted.
Motion approved. Is the 13th, right? Seconded by Ed Lombard. Favor?
aye.
Aye.
Vote is 4-0.
It now takes 4 votes to approve anything, correct? Instead of 3? Okay.
Well, we're
Now, Mr. Chair, if I could explain the file.
Sit down, please. Now, let's see.
Mr. Chairman, can I raise a, before you do, Dan, can I raise a technical question? Maybe you can answer, Dan. We have a quorum of 4. So it's legal to have this meeting. Question now is, what kind of a vote is necessary to adopt a motion? Seems to me only 3 is required.
Correct. A majority of the quorum.
All right, so in the case of the minutes, would only 3 have, the 3 of us been sufficient to adopt the minutes?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, that's a general Roberts rule. If there's a quorum present and there's no other provision specific to the particular issue requiring a vote more than a supernumerary vote, then a majority of the quorum. Chairman, I would like to put in the record the situation regarding the what they call they call it the finance ordinance, if I may. If I could, I would like that to be in the record. And if is that okay with you at this time? Yeah. Well,
ourselves,
I don't want this
which I drafted.
this
and Ed
confusion to
Lombard
occur again. What happened on June 10, our committee was called to order as a selection advisory committee and not as an audit committee.
Yes, okay.
Ed Lombard challenged that and said it should be called, it's a special meeting of the audit committee. We don't sit as a special advisory committee. So that was done, and then the rank and recommendations for the auditor fiscal year 2019 was adopted. On the July 29 meeting, Amy Baker, our contract manager, and Mr. Lang explained that under the ordinance, the finance ordinance, it was necessary to have a selection advisory committee. This had never been, we had never had one before. We never had one before. We didn't, everybody was all confused about it. So at that time, then Ed moved to reconsider the vote on June 10, and the committee unanimously ranked and recommended the firm, essentially the same people, but it was done in a full audit committee vote, and not that confused We didn't know whether we were a selection advisory committee or what the hell we were, okay?
Quite confusing.
So at that meeting, as was noted in the minutes which we just approved, I requested a copy of the ordinance that allegedly requires us to have a selection advisory committee. Amy did in fact furnish that to me. And as Jim Steele has acknowledged as well, that ordinance sets up a provision where the particular department staff proposes to the committee and makes, does the review and makes, and so forth, as a special committee. And that committee, the Selection Advisory Committee, which is 3 members selected by the town manager, they evaluate the bids. And that committee then submits those to the town council. Now, that's fine. I mean, it's a very detailed ordinance, and it's a good ordinance in many ways, but it's inconsistent with the state statute, as Ed has pointed out, in which the Audit Committee is mandated by state law to review and make the approval or the recommendation. So I pointed that out to Amy, and she kind of agreed, and she was going to discuss it with, I asked her to so inform the town manager and the town attorney. I've heard nothing since, but it's quite clear that we are not subject to that particular provision, Section 14 of the so-called finance ordinance, which we'd never seen for the first time ever. We never have been. We were never.
After that was over with,
Yeah.
our next meeting,
Yeah.
we did have a very
Yeah, we did.
serious discussion about that. And I don't know,
Well,
the chair over,
I wanted to advise the committee of the follow-up on that, and I think that hopefully in the future we won't have that confusion again.
okay.
Mr. Chairman, I concur with Dan's assessment there. Can I raise another question about the minutes, or at least subjects raised in the minutes? In the last meeting, or the meeting of July 19th, July 29th, looking at Roman 5 of the minutes, Mr. Hughes questioned the status of the supplemental report for capital projects. Director Lang replied he would follow up with the request. Have we seen, I presume that would have resulted in preparation of some sort of a list of capital projects. Was that provided, or did you follow up, Robert or Dan, or have you had any reaction to that?
I got a note here that for a follow-up, but I didn't
I'll
receive any.
answer to you right off the top of my head. I'm going to say I probably did not respond to that request. However, when I get back to my office, I will submit that list that I have at this point in time. It has been, let's say, brought up to date as of September 30th. And I would be glad to give you all a copy of all the projects that we have working as far as the capital projects. As you're all aware, we have 2 or 3 types working at the moment. One is the replacement of capital equipment throughout the town, which we have an annual budget that the manager has established, and we're funding each year. That one is rolling forward, and there's funds available for each one of those, and I will give you that. The other is our capital projects that's rolling with the water and the stormwater program. That's the biggest that's going on in the island that's being worked on. And then the last would be other types of contracts and projects that are going on that are grant funded. So I need to find out from you all exactly, do you want all of those? Do you want them broken out as such? What's your preference?
Leave that up to, I don't know what.
Well, if I could just supplement with Dan is, he asked for the supplemental report for capital projects, the status of the supplemental report. I presume you just didn't make those words up, that you extracted those words from some document or other. And I would say that that's the report he's looking for, and that's the report I'd like to see also. Whatever that means to you, Robert.
Well, that's why I'm looking for clarification with you all. One is, like
You know
I
what a
said,
capital project is?
I've done them for 45 years,
Good.
Mr.
And
Lombard.
then why don't you just
But
give us a
they're-
list of the capital projects?
I can do that. They're all funded by different sources, and that's the question I'm coming back to you all on, having a
Why
list of
don't
information.
you list them, each project, and indicate its source, the source of funding for it? Can you do that?
I'll work something up for you and see what we
That'd be
have
good, yeah.
as to, the things I've got to do right now is work on the year-end stuff, get the things that are complied with, that are required for a year-end process. And these things are supplementary, and I'll be glad to put something together for you, but it's extraneous to what I have to go through right now for year-end work.
Well, we've been talking about this list of capital projects for several meetings now, and I got to tell you, I'm at sea to know what this list looks like. So whatever kind of list you can put together without straining your resources and your applicability to other projects, more important, higher priorities, I would appreciate it.
Your request is definitely heard from this end. Per your request earlier, when you asked for a copy of the proposed budget that was submitted, I provided to you, and the capital are all listed in there also. So that's why I'm asking, I come back to you, and I'll be glad to put something together and talk to the board and see if this is the type of thing you're looking for. And if we need to tweak things, we'll be glad to do that. But I just wanted to kind of keep you in.
Another question, Robert, along these lines, the source of funding for these projects are the reserves?
Not necessarily. Some
Okay.
could be, but not, most of them are funded by way of council action that has
Okay.
established them.
And
Council,
they're formulated in the budget. In other words, they're identified in the budget documents
Yeah.
themselves when the council approves the budget.
well, they are, as far as those projects, the council had already pre-approved the capital project for the water and the stormwater in the nature of the master plan and the contracts that are awarded to the construction companies, et cetera. So those are a little bit different, and they're ongoing for the next, I'm going 6, 7, 8 years until they're complete, I think. Mr. Steele has probably a greater insight to those as to their true length of time, but all are in there, and the expenses are reflected in the budget when I submit the budgets. But I'll be glad to work with you all and provide you the information you need so you have some insight to what's going on. That's not a question.
We can do that with the budget that we have. I have a copy of the budget, and I went through there, and I did see.
Yes.
But we can, if you would issue a copy of the budget, which is about that thick, everybody here in the board.
I'll be
You should have
glad.
it anyway. You can quickly see what the capital assets are.
Well, I've got a copy of the budget before me. Robert loaned me his budget book.
Yes, sir.
I see a category called capital improvements. Is that what we're talking about?
If it's in the back of the book, it's a list, about 200 items listed back there. They're all specific in nature, from swimming pool equipment, umbrellas, rolling stock, exercise equipment. Those are the replacement items that we fund each and every year.
You
Then
call
there-
exercise equipment a capital project?
Yes, sir. Capital in nature, under the state law, anything over
I got you.
and life of greater than 1 year is considered a capital outlay.
So that is different than the entry in the budget document, the all funds budget of $1,291,025 for capital improvements?
That would be the capital improvements
That's
fund.
it.
That's
That's what we're talking about here.
That-
This number's projects in the hundreds, is that what you said?
Yes, sir. There's about 100, almost 200 projects in that fund. Keeps turning off on me. I apologize to you about that. But let me put some things together. I'll be glad to meet with each or every one of you,
Well-
or bring something together that meets your expectations rather than try to guess at what I give you as to whether that's what you asked for.
Well, I wasn't thinking about umbrellas or anything like that, things that are relatively short-term in their life expectancy or under a certain minimum amount, but what we've asked for, I believe, is a list of where we are on the major capital projects and the source of funding, the amount expended to date, and the amount estimated to complete. That's, in general, what I was looking for.
Well, that's why I asked the
Yeah.
question to you, because what you're expressing right now is not what was been expressed in the past. It was capital items in general, a list of them, so you'd
Yeah.
have information. So as we talk, some of your inquiries are being better, let's say, defined so that when I go out and do these things, I'm giving you what you're asking for, not something that I'm giving you because I think that's what you want. Okay?
Robert, another question. I hear a lot the council talking about in their deliberations on the budget, reserves being funded. Where are the reserves in the budget? I don't see a line that says reserves, a line item in the budget that says reserves.
Let me look through the report. We provided a report on the reserves, identifying there's about $6 million. Some were defined earlier when Mr. Steele set up the recommendation over the next 2 or 3 years. We've been following that
I remember when it
guideline.
was set up, but I'm looking for a line item in a budget which says reserves.
I'll pull something out and show it to you.
So are you
The
saying
reserve-
there is no line item in a budget called reserves?
I'm not saying that. I've got to go back and look at, see what I put in, because I
Because
put
I'm just wondering
several
what the
schedules.
council is referring to when they describe their satisfaction or whatever with the reserves.
During the work, the council had asked to find out how much money we have in reserves, and I provided a schedule as such, and that's what they were
That was a
looking at.
supplementary schedule to the budget. Yeah,
That's correct. Since those monies weren't being placed in operations for expenditure,
I understand.
they were given as general, as
I
information.
got you. But let me just say that if you could find someplace in the budget where I can just go to the budget without asking for supplemental schedules and so forth, which showed me what the reserves are in this budget, that would be helpful to me. I think would be helpful to a lot of people in Fort Myers Beach. It's just to be able to look at the budget and know what the reserves are, if there is such a way to find it out, by looking at the budget. If there's not, then let me know that too.
Oh, I will.
Sorry, Jim?
It would be a net assets, there's 6 of them. There's what you can spend, established to be spent, like that, and there's 6 of those. That was put out by
Are you looking at the budget?
That was, well, that's, should be in the budget.
Well, that's what I'm looking for. So something in the budget which gives me that information on reserves.
That's a GASB order.
Robert.
Mr. Lombard, may I
Yes,
interrupt you
sir.
just for 1 second?
Yeah.
The town's financial records never broke out those reserves by specificity by line item. With the new system, we've taken all of those from financial statements that were approved, and we've broken those out. And I'm in the midst of trying to get these reports in such a way that will give you all the information you need, that it'll show you how those reserves are broken down. And then the last part would be the unassigned reserves, which would be what the council would use if they wish to fund special projects, programs, and what have you, that there may not be enough funds in the annual revenues and expenditures.
Well, I think I understand what the intent of reserve is. I'm questioning where it is in the budget, because when the council talks about the budget, and when I listen to them talk about the budget, or when I look at the budget, I'm wondering how much is in the budget in reserves? Because I remember when Jim and others established this idea of having reserves, having sufficient reserves. And I just feel like, I don't want to tell you how to do your budgeting, but when I look at the budget, and I know this term reserves is important, I look at the budget and try to find reserves, and I don't see it. So that gives rise to my question.
And I'll follow up with you and provide that
Good deal.
information.
Now, I have 1 or 2 more questions on the budget. I'm looking at the budget book on page 47, talks about stormwater. It has a revenue of special assessments. What are special assessments? Is that stormwater fees?
Yes, sir.
Is that entirely stormwater fees?
Yes, sir. The 1.1
$1,130,000 is
Yes,
budgeted
sir.
for
Those
fiscal
are,
20.
they're labeled in the, our fee schedules as assessments, not as a fee, but as an assessment. And therefore, that's where they recorded as such. The other monies that you see there would be, let's say, interest income, maybe on the funds that are residual, or transfers in.
The term special assessments threw me. They are stormwater fees, and that's the way the ordinance is established. Something called stormwater fees as a charge to our taxpayers. And
I've done this years ago. Setting us up with stormwater and have assessment made. We went through this when we were sitting down there at
I remember it.
very well.
The stormwater fees were set up based upon an ERU, equivalent residential unit, and the fee is $19.98 per month per ERU. And in theory, I think we have, 11,000 ERUs?
Well,
Or is it
no,
1,100?
we're closer to about 4,400, 4,600 in that area multiplied out. But the number of units that we calculate against that ERU, you're right about the ERU equivalent.
translate to 11,000.
How many times do we go through that?
Well, we're all talking the same thing. It's just that if you're using the term fee is usually for a service being provided. Assessment is you're assessing people for the fact of being able to build a system by which it'll manage their water, excess water.
Continuing on this line of questioning, Robert, in page 47, revenues, as I recall, the council approved a loan from the general fund to finance fiscal 20 operations of the stormwater fund. But I don't see this loan identified in this budget here. But does that mean because it hasn't been updated?
That's correct. That's one. Number two, if the opportunity arises, I'd like to speak with the council about a loan compared to a transfer, because when you talk loans, that's a temporary situation. And what I'm envisioning when I listen to this discussion is almost like not a sinking fund, but a suspense account. You just keep putting money over the transfer, setting up this as a borrowing, and before you know it, you're sitting with $18-20 million worth of loans. And some council is going to sit back and say, now, how are we going to pay all this back?
Well, let me just respond to that for a second. The ordinance does contemplate loans from the general fund. However, the ordinance specifically says temporary loans. So I think in the wisdom of the council and whoever formulated that particular piece of language in the ordinance, they foresaw that possibility and precluded it by calling them temporary loans. We all know that temporary loans don't last 18 years, more like 1 year and a payback. But I think that's why it doesn't particularly bother me.
Well, it does.
It'd be considered a loan, and particularly since the ordinance authorizes loans, temporary loans from the general fund.
And you're right, Mr. Lombard. In a situation like that, you do try to provide all the resources that could possibly be made available by a municipality to help take care of a program that you're trying to fund. But then again, we collect only X dollars to be able to meet a total expenditure that's been incorporated. And Mr. Steele put together a worksheet a couple years ago that was showing how that would be processed. That's an ongoing thing. And the idea that, at least if, and Mr. Steele can correct me, but my understanding is the revenues that are coming in through assessments are established for the retirement of the debt that's funding the projects on a revolving process. So that at some point in time, that $1.1 million that we collect annually, the debt service to the SRF. Now, if those funds are being to meet annual operating expenses, then that cuts down the amount of money that can be put into the SRF loan program.
Well, that's clearly true, but on the other hand, the ordinance specifically says that the stormwater fees are there to supplement construction, maintenance, operations, including personnel and so forth. So the stormwater fee has always been established to provide the resources necessary to pay all the costs of the stormwater program, including capital costs. I mean, those are the terms. I can read the ordinance to you if you like.
You know,
I've got the
if-
ordinance
if
here,
I-
but I'd be happy to read it to you if you.
If I could jump in here, Ed, if you don't mind. The issue which he's pointing out was discussed at great length at town council level. And the town council did agree and act and say that it will be a loan. It'll be a loan of $300,000, wasn't it? $300,000. And not a transfer. That was the issue. Was it going to be a loan or a transfer? And they have come to that. They arrived, in my view, at the correct resolution of that issue. There was you can get into a broader argument about, in general, the transparency and so forth of not having all of the costs of operating the proprietary stormwater system in the budget for stormwater, as distinguished from the way it's handled in the water department. And I thought it was resolved at the town council level.
It was discussed during that period of time, but that was not a separate vote by any means. It was a collaborative approval in the budget, but it was not a separate vote. If I'm wrong.
No, I think you're wrong. We walked out of that meeting and,
Vote was 3-2, right?
yeah, there was a vote.
Okay, I stand corrected in what I'm saying to you. Mr. Steele, I'm sorry.
No, the vote was 3-2, Robert.
Yeah, I had a couple of comments.
Yes, I know. You're not.
When the stormwater fund was created, it was for drainage of stormwater on the island. And in 2015, the town had spent a considerable amount of money on stormwater and water, which they didn't have. They owed the contractor $2.4 million, and they had no money to pay it. So that's when we established the fee of $19.98 per ERU per month to bring in roughly 1.15 million, 1.1 million, a little more than that per year. And over time, those revenues would be sufficient to repay those temporary loans. And then the town also transferred, I think it was $634,000 from the gas tax fund to the stormwater utility, because gas tax funds can be used for stormwater. And they also transferred, as I recall, about $1.2 million from the gas tax fund to the water utility to pay for restoration of roads that have been torn up for putting in water lines and stormwater. And at the end of the year 2000, September 30th, 2016, the stormwater utility, I think, had a deficit of around $100,000. And by the end of 2016, the stormwater fund was flush. It had enough cash to cover all those prior year expenditures. And then it was anticipated it would build up some fund balance, and that the gas tax fund would be used for some of the debt service payments for the stormwater utility, because you can use gas tax funds for stormwater utility related projects. So now I think the stormwater utility is flush, except for the outstanding loans, but the current revenues cover the expenditures for the payments to the state revolving loan fund. And then some gas tax funds are also being used currently for the stormwater maintenance, which is permissible by state statute. The town attorneys and the auditors both concurred you can use gas tax funds for those purposes.
I don't remember the auditors saying that, but I've heard the attorney say that.
Well, I checked with the auditors
but
when I was interim town manager, and they said, yes, that is permissible.
I'd like to point out that under the ordinance 1820, in section 3102, that the intent of this section is to implement provisions of a statute in a Florida statute by creating a stormwater utility and to adopt stormwater utility fees sufficient to plan, construct, operate, and maintain the town's stormwater management system. That's a pretty broad authorization for what the stormwater fund is to be used for and what those utility fees are supposed to represent.
And I think that, Jim, I don't understand I understand what you're saying about the use of gas tax fund. The issue, as I understood it, was the use of general funds.
General funds may be used to
Right.
supplement the stormwater utility.
Well, general funds can be used for all sorts of things,
Yes.
but the unique situation that we have is an ordinance which provides that all expenses relating to the stormwater utility should be paid through the the enterprise fund. So there has to be money coming into the enterprise fund, the stormwater enterprise fund, and budgeted in that, and as a part of that budget, and not somewhere else in the budget. And that was the issue that was troubling everybody.
That determination is up to the council. When it was,
Well, it is, and they made a determination. They said, yeah, we agree.
but the council also agreed that you could use gas tax funds for paying maintenance and some of the
Fine. Yeah.
debt service. And it's in a cash flow projection that was done back in 2016. It's presented to the council. Here's how we want to pay for stormwater. And you use gas tax funds, and most of it was funded from the $19.98 per month. And the council approved that. I think it's been ongoing. I haven't seen it for a couple years, but I'm sure it could be updated, and it shows exactly what's being used.
I want
It was
to,
anticipated that some of the gas tax funds would be used to pay debt service, and some would be used to pay for maintenance until I think the year 2033 or 34, when we'd pay down enough of the loans where you could prepay one loan and then phase out the use of gas tax funds.
I wouldn't dispute your recollection of what happened in 2016, Jim. But along comes 2018 and a new ordinance, 1820. That's what we're living under now. That superseded 1508, which was the underpinning of the 2016 agreements. So along comes ordinance 18-20, and I just read it to you. That's pretty specific language. Stormwater utility fees sufficient to plan, construct, operate, and maintain the stormwater system, the town's stormwater system. Now, you say the general fund can be used to supplement these funds, and that's what the attorney agreed. On the other hand, this ordinance, which in the town's parlance would be the equivalent of a statute, authorizes that the general fund may loan the funds to the stormwater utility. So we have a more recent expression of policy in this ordinance. The town wants established this ordinance to authorize the general fund to loan the money which is exactly what the council agreed to at the budget meeting, a loan from the general fund. So I think it all hangs together. It just has to be operated properly.
But which I concur with what you're saying, but in order for the town to fund the debt service payments, they're going to have to, if they don't use gas tax funds, they're going to have to increase that $19.98 per month ERU.
That's precisely the case. That is precisely accurate. That is 100% true.
Yes, it's up to the council.
I have just two more questions as it relates to this budget that Robert loaned me.
Excuse me, though.
Go ahead.
Ed, I think this has, I think the council has acted and if this and requires a revision of a certain provision aspects of the budget to comply with the action by the council.
Not us.
No, that's not our problem at all. It's the town council.
Why are we beating this to death?
Why are we what?
How are we beating this to death? This is council's job, not ours.
We're expressing our concern that that the budget doesn't accurately reflect what the council.
Well, let me back up on that,
Yeah.
because you need clarification, Mr. Hughes. What Mr. Lombard asked for was a copy of the budget, and that the budget I gave him was the one I presented to the council. Council took action at the last meeting to make modifications to that budget. I'm in process of updating all of that and being able to put out the final approved budget. Now, there was discussion about the loans, but until such times the stormwater expenses those funds, there's no loan there because there's cash flow there. But I can set up every time there's a expenditure out of the stormwater for an operating expense, set that up as a due from the general fund to pay back as a loan, establish a loan. That's not an issue. So as far as reporting, we will not be in non-compliance with the action of the council.
But you said you were going to go back and you were asking them to reconsider it being a loan and be a transfer in lieu of a loan.
I talked about, that was clarification on my part when it comes to loans and transfers without. And I was just making a comment on the basis that if you just keep on transferring monies with the intent to pay it back and there's not a structure established, at what point in time do you draw that line and say, now we're going to stop and pay it all back, and where do you pay it back from?
Well, the statute, the ordinance requires it be a temporary loan, Robert, so that's what you have to come to grips with. What does the word temporary mean?
Well, I'm back to the same, I'm with you on that, no difference in discussion. It's just, let's say it's 2 years from now, that we have $800,000 in there that's due back to the general fund. If we collect $1 million in revenues in assessments, we pay back the $800,000. There's no money in that fund to continue to pay the capital expenditures that's being used as a revolving process. So, yeah, we need to have cash flow. And if the general fund is the one that's going to be providing that cash flow, no disagreement with you. We go back to the council and tell the council what's going to be needed for the next fiscal year.
That's right. What you described is you're on the horns of a dilemma, but it's a policy dilemma. And that's one for the council to
It is. No disagreement.
And I'd go back and once again reiterate what I mentioned, the way I reacted to Jim Steele. I think it means ultimately an increase in the stormwater fee, whether you call it an assessment or not, but ultimately an increase in the stormwater fee. I have two more questions on this matter. On the budget document you gave me, Robert, we have in the on page 48, which is where the stormwater expenses are. A figure of $152,565 in the 2019 budget for debt principal. So I presume that's the repayment to the state revolving fund.
It's setting up for that, yes, sir, because the state has given us numbers to start setting aside starting in May. I'm pretty sure it was May that we start setting up the sinking fund for that. So I was just setting that up as the funds necessary because it's only going to run a few I forget, maybe 28,000, 27,000 a month to set aside, and I put that in there to show that those funds are being committed for the debt service process.
That was the 2019 figure, Robert.
Okay. And the 29, we were held off on that. We didn't have to. At the time that came, I was estimating that we would have a commitment to be able to, for a sinking fund, but the state came back and held that debt obligation or sinking fund obligation until 2020, the May of 2020. So that's just money, even though it's budgeted, it's not being spent.
Well, I was going to ask that. Why does, even though we show the 152,000 in 2019, it shows zero in the budget for repayment of debt principal in 2020?
What's that line item,
Because-
Ed? What-
Right there.
Yeah, but it's under.
Because
It's
I'll,
under stormwater expenses.
Oh, okay.
Maybe that's why that ladder's in there. The guy's in there trying to fix this.
It was my anticipation we'd be paying a portion of that debt in 19. I subsequently received letters from the state that's been deferred. I'll set aside May until September, and the first payment will be due in October or November of 2021, or 2020, excuse
So
me.
you're
That
going
year
to
will be
push this
over.
into 2020 is what you're saying?
That's correct.
I got you. I have one final question on the budget. I understood that stormwater fees were only to be spent on stormwater. That's what I understood anyhow. But I saw somewhere in the water budget, the water utility budget, a transfer in from the stormwater fund. And I'm wondering why that is.
I'll be glad to look at that. There should be no transfer from the water.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jim got a
I think
comment.
I think I have an answer. The water utility sends out the bills for the stormwater utility. And they also send out the bills for Lee County sewers. So Lee County is paying back the water utility their proportionate share of the billing cost. And the stormwater utility then is also paying the water utility their proportionate share of the billing cost. That's what that's for.
It's a minor amount, relatively speaking. I think it's, I don't see it exactly here, but it's maybe $30,000-$40,000.
Well, everything Mr. Steele said is true. I'll be looking at that transaction just to validate exactly what it's for. And that's why we're doing, I mentioned to you, these numbers are raw at this time.
Yeah.
And I will be scrubbing those for accuracy.
I suppose as an alternative way to budget that, one might budget those funds in the stormwater budget as is contemplated by the ordinance, and charge the stormwater budget for that funds and transfer it to the water utility. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, we'll follow up on it.
That it? Yes, sir. Well then, we shall move on to the next item, which is organization of the chair and vice chair.
Mr. Chairman, I nominate, if nominations are in order, or nominations in order, I nominate Dan Hughes to be the chairman of the Audit Committee.
I'll second that.
I'll go along with that. Do you accept that?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Change of seats.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Motion's adopted?
Well, let's not bother to change seats now. No, it's fine. It's
Now
fine.
you're in charge.
It's fine. Well, thank you. The first thing I would like to do,
Got to do a vice chair.
oh, yes. Ed, you are the existing vice chair. Would you be willing to continue that?
It's a great job.
Would someone make a nomination?
I nominate Ed Lombard for vice chair.
All right. Really don't need a second for the nomination, but that's fine. But there being any further nominations for vice chair? Hearing none, the nominations are closed, and Ed Lombard is appointed the vice chair.
Thank you very much.
I'll just be back over here by the pile of wood.
And I would like at this point to make a motion. I move that we hereby commend and thank Jim Rodwell for his meritorious service as chair of our committee for, Jim, you've been since the inception of the committee to date, and for your expertise and experience which you have brought to our committee and will continue to bring to our committee, to our committee's deliberations. I move that you be commended and thanked for those services.
I second that wholeheartedly.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Jim,
I
you're...
do need to inform the committee that I'll be going back to school again in January.
Back to school?
Yes,
Wow.
I go to FGC.
Well, you're,
So anyway, I will be doing that next January through April.
you amazed me with your botany article in the paper. I read it. I don't know what half those terms are that you keep talking about.
The
You know,
idea
the
being
pistil
that
and the leaves and our, but
The idea is that I put a term out there. I expect you to go to Google and find out what it is. All right. Oh, now I can sleep.
right, the next item on our agenda, Roman numeral 5, update fiscal year 2019 audit process. Robert?
Yes, just wanted to give you a quick status. I have met with representatives from Malden Jenkins back about 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, met the senior auditor that'll be on the job and the partner. They have come back for a one-day review of our system so they can become familiar with what our system does, the internal controls, the accountabilities, who does what. So that took place about 2.5 weeks ago, closer to 3, I guess, at this time. And between them and our department, we determined that we're looking at December 16th as the date to start the audit process. We'll be running, as soon as we run all of our numbers, we check them all out, we'll run it by them so that they're up to date with it, and we'll see if everybody's scheduled to start at that point in time. If all goes well, and knocking on wood, I'm looking forward to providing this board a preliminary audit report early February. I hope I'm not biting off more than I can chew, but I believe that's reasonable. The work that's been done so far has moved us rather quickly into a position that we can start meeting those deadlines and try to get a report out where it's meaningful instead of waiting till June 29th to get out the door. That's where we are at this moment, and staff are working on all the elements reflected in the prior report. So we've been hitting on each and every one of the findings and making sure they're not going to be an issue this next fiscal year. And that brings it up. I'll answer any questions you may have.
But Robert, has the contract been signed?
Yes, sir.
Just want to remind you that the minutes indicated that the committee wanted to review the contract.
Yeah, it was going to be my next question, too. The Malden and Jenkins have been, of course, informed that they were chosen by the council, and it was done right after we recommended them. And you already have a contract executed?
Yes, sir.
There were certain things we had some concerns about that we wanted to look at.
I can let me bring the contracts to provide it to you all, let you look at it, and if any areas that you have questions about, I'm sure that...
There was a time had to be done at a certain time. No, it had to be done because we had the problem last year.
Yes, and that's why I mentioned some of the things I did.
Did you put that in there in the contract? It has to be done by this time?
I don't recall putting that into the contract.
We discussed that, you know,
Well,
because there was a real problem for us, which we went through last year. You know, that report should have been done a hell of a lot earlier than what it was, and we both know that.
that's correct.
And we said it in the meeting, we were talking about that in the meeting, that we wanted to have a cutoff.
Yes, and I'll look at that. I'm not aware that I implemented that. I can't recall that. However, that's why I was indicating to you all that we were starting the audit process in December, not in late February or March, so that there will be a document in your hands in the month of
That's
February.
why we wanted to see the contract. And John Goggins mentioned that. So,
I'll be glad to provide a contract to you. Okay.
Well, I would just like to say that, you know, it was quite clear in the minutes that we requested the opportunity to review that contract. I think there needs to be kind of a follow-up type of situation here. We seem to have several instances where we request things, but things happen, and then we find out about them later, Robert, frankly. So I would appreciate if you would try to honor our requests. I realize that you're under, you know, the council is your ultimate, so they're the boss, and we're just asking for information or requesting review, and we would like our requests to be honored in a timely manner. Thank you. Is there any other, Jim?
I just have one question for Robert. Robert, how many days a week are you working?
I work
2 days.
I'm here 2 days, sometimes 3. A couple weeks ago, I was here 5 days. So I'm here when I'm needed, and I work from home and some when I'm not here.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Robert, you know, I brought this up before. I think this is a 5-day job. But I think a better way to do the 5-day thing is when the audit is going on and the auditors are here. They're here 5 days. I think we had problems in our last audit. It caused a lot of confusion, is that people were talking to each other back down here, and they're making up their own ideas what to do things on, and it wasn't actually supervised. Approach to it. No,
And-
it's
and-
nothing-
and-
I think you do good work, I really do, but I think that's what you need to do. If there's an auditor in the building, you're here. But again, I'm just a volunteer. Not my badge anymore.
An appointed volunteer
Right.
appointed by the council.
All right, Tim, thank you.
Right.
And you have expressed that in the past as well. Is there anything else? Any other members?
If I may I respond?
Yeah.
I think your question is a very appropriate one. I came in here in June of 2017, okay? And for almost 2 years, I was putting in between 4 and 5 days a week, as well as working till 10, 11 o'clock at night. So the time that I put in, update the town's financial records, procedures, people, training, set something in place with accountability, internal controls, has been, those oats have been sown well, and the staff now are on the position of working through those deliverables and getting them out. This town's records were in a testy situation for a long time, running 3 sets of books with only one person knowing what's going on and staff changing. So I have cleared that up to the point where I feel very comfortable that the system is in place with the controls that's needed. However, I am always available to take care of things and stay on top of them. That's the best that I can give you at this point in time. I won't let the organization down. I took a big hit this past year. So did Jim Rodwell. He and I have discussed this, and it's something had to be done, and it was done this past year. I don't see that happening any further in the future. And I thank you, gentlemen, for working with me through this process.
All right, thank you, Robert. I presume we're going to have a next regular meeting on the second Tuesday in November?
I'll schedule it. What I'll need on some of these things, since the audit won't be started at that point in time, would be what information do you want to bring toward the board for information to be discussed, okay, for a meeting. So you just let me know. I worked with, in the past, with Jim Rodwell on occasions. Sometimes there was nothing to report or discuss or to vote on, so those days were passed as such. But you tell me what you like, Mr. Hughes, and I'll be glad to work with you on it.
Well, I'd like you to send out to us a copy of the contract with Malden and Jenkins, and so, you know, well in advance of the next meeting. So,
Might be something we want to discuss.
right, that may be something we wish to discuss, although it's already been executed. But anybody else have any particular suggestions for the
Contracts can always be amended.
right?
too.
Yeah. Or what,
well,
and if there's anything that you would like us, you know, you would just, at your discretion.
I'll be glad to. That's why
Okay.
I'll stay in touch with you, Mr. Hughes, on
All right.
as those dates come
We
up.
already have
Jim?
the dates for the audit to start. Maybe you want to tell
Right now,
tell the committee when the dates are going to be, the audit will be done. I think at the end of December.
we're starting
Yeah.
December 16th is the go date right now that we've discussed with Malden Jenkins as far as the beginning of the field work.
Jim, you had something?
You
Oh,
should be here for that. When the auditors come upstairs to start, you should be there. That's what I would do.
right.
And I
Sit
think,
down there and see what they're talking about.
Okay.
was there also a follow-up needed on capital expenditures or
Yes.
something? That maybe we can discuss at that meeting.
Okay.
Better practice in going up and down the stairs there.
Hey,
Like the elevator.
and His Eminence, our Vice Mayor, Ray Murphy, has, would you care to make any comment? We're about to wrap things up.
He never turns a microphone.
Ray Murphy, for the record. I don't have any comment. Congratulations on the reappointment. Congratulations to Jim Steele rejoining the group here. And of course, congratulations to you, Jim, on your service to the committee. And everybody appreciates all that you've done. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, I move we now adjourn.
Second?
Any second?
Second.
By all means.
Motion by Lombard, second by Steele. Meeting is hereby adjourned at 10:02.